The Aerosoft A330 has been one of the most hotly anticipated add-ons for prepared version 4, and it has finally been released. The first announcement came almost 6 years ago, and after facing many delays and setbacks, it is great to see it finally come together. But was the wait worth it? Hi everyone, it's Nick again, and today we're going to be reviewing the Aerosoft A330 Professional for prepared version 4. First off, I'd like to mention that we are only looking at the stable version of the A330 and not the experimental updates. This is because those are still work in progress and we are looking at what the developer has labeled as stable and is available for everyone to download without having to opt into something. Installing the Aerosoft A330 is just like any other Aerosoft product. Installing asks you to confirm you agree with the terms, and then we'll ask you for your order, email, and serial number. From there, you can select where the installer will install the aircraft, and then a window showing all of the installation parts will show up. Once you click next, the installation of the A330 will start. The installation also brings up a DirectX box and a Microsoft Visual C++ box after the main installation is complete. Once the installation is complete, the installer will advise you to restart your computer before attempting to load the aircraft. The Aerosoft A330 comes with only one variant of the A330, and that is the A330-300 with Rolls-Royce engines. Whilst these are the community favorite engines, not having the other engine options is disappointing as many community favorite airlines use the different engine options. The A330 comes with some useful applications to help creating an accurate flight deck for your airline or your own personal preferences. Starting with the documentation, there are 9 separate documents that come with the plane. Ranging from normal procedures to connected flight deck flows, finding what you need is likely to be in one of these documents. It goes into depth, but not too in depth to be overwhelming in my opinion. However, the documents as a whole feel as though they were an afterthought until it was close to released. This shows as some of the documents are labeled as Aerosoft A318 to 321 collection. Whilst the procedures might be the same as the A320 family, and the A330 is very similar, the lack of polish here feels underwhelming and shows signs of what's to come with the rest of the aircraft. Moving on to Delivery Manager, I'm assuming that at some point it was working, but this does not seem to be the case now. In Delivery Manager folder, Delivery Manager is labeled for the A318 and A319, not the A330. Opening this program confirms that this is the case, as there are no option for the A330. This means we are stuck with this old adding CFG entries to the aircraft. This could be a problem for the newer or less experienced users, as adding CFG entries isn't the most simple process and can be different for each aircraft. I am also surprised this has not been fixed yet, almost 3 months after release. The A330 also comes with a configuration tool. This allows you to change various options such as your navigation source between NavData Pro and Navigraph, changing the maximum number of elements on the navigation display, turning on and off logging, realistic company route systems, and web server for the remote MCDU access, and more. FS2 crew settings are also in here, and a way to connect charts and add documentation to the EFB. While these are nice to have, including them in the third MCDU would be a better place in my opinion. The A330 also comes with the normal Aerosoft updater. Opening the updater, selecting the A330, checking for an update, and then clicking update if one is available, and the aircraft will be updated to the latest stable version. There is a way to opt in to experimental updates and to get the latest updates sooner, but sometimes these can lead to the product becoming more unstable or having new bugs. 2 hotfixes have been released closely after release, but nothing has been released since then, besides the experimental fixes. These experimental updates get plenty of more fixes and updates, having at least 6 new versions come out since the release of the last public hotfix, but none have been made it to fully stable releases yet. Moving on to the modeling of the aircraft, I was fairly impressed with the detail throughout the plane. The exterior modeling is the best looking part of the plane in my opinion. The A320 family from Aerosoft, which looked great, lacked the feeling of being real and accurate representation of the A320 in my opinion. The A330, however, does not have that feeling at all, and looks like an A330 should and feels right as well. Every part of the plane is modeled with great attention to detail. The landing gear shows clear signs of having a lot of work put into it, with pipes and wires even being visible in the wheel wells. The twin Rolls-Royce engines are modeled with great care and look like they were pulled off the real aircraft. The fuselage as well has details all over it, with antennas and sensors. However, one shortcoming of the exterior is the lack of transparent windows and a cabin on the inside. Instead, it is simply a window texture. While this is no deal breaker, it's definitely something to note, as a lot of the other aircraft releases have see-through windows with a cabin on the inside. The animations on the exterior also look like they have taken a step up from the previous Airbus. The animations for the control surfaces are nice and smooth. I was really concerned for the gear animations, seeing as when the A330 lands, the gear often offers resistance before fully coming down, but Aerosoft managed to pull this off with some fairly good animations. While not perfect, it is still better than what I expected. The wing flex was also a concern. Seeing as Aerosoft has had multiple chances to add wing flex to the A320 but did not, I was worried that A330 might suffer a similar fate. I am happy to say that the wing flex is not bad by any means. However, it did leave me disappointed in some ways. First, the wings don't flex as much as I would expect. Loading the plane up to maximum takeoff weight and rotating gives an underwhelming amount of flex. Comparing it to real-world pictures and videos, it looks like my suspicions were correct. Having ground roll wing flex as well would be a great addition to this aircraft. Moving inside, the A330 shares a lot in common with its little brother, the A320. 90% of the cockpit will look familiar to A320 users, with noticeable differences being with the overhead fuel and hydraulics panel, and the throttles using reversers similar to Boeing aircraft instead of the reversers sliding further back in the A320. Every difference is modeled with a lot of details, and the whole cockpit looks fantastic. Cockpit animations are fairly simplistic, however. Most of the switches are snappy, without a traveling animation, but the buttons do seem to have a nice, decent animation to them. There are some other animations, such as the opening of the cockpit window, the table and footrest, and the cover for the emergency oxygen. It would be nice to see the efforts for some of the animations going to the switches, as the animations for the switches really bring the cockpit immersion to life. And just like in the A320 family, the coffee cup is back with a simple call for the flight attendant. Starting on the exterior again, the textures are fairly good. The aircraft is also very clean. All the provided textures are spotless, just like if the aircraft had rolled off the assembly line. There are a lot of little details around the planes. Warning signs and instructions all look correct and in the correct positions. However, on closer inspection, everything is a little bit fuzzier than I am normally used to seeing. A quick look at the texture files gives the answer. The provided textures are all in 2048 by 2048. With other major aircraft releases, we see a 4096 by 4096 texture resolution, which is 4 times the number of pixels that we are getting with the A330. This is something I hope Aerosoft can update to give their liveries a crisper look. It is not difficult currently to see the jagged lines on the exterior textures. The A330 does come with a good selection of liveries to start, 13 of them from ranging all over the world. However, some of the liveries are outdated, and some are up to date. The Cathay Pacific livery is in the old livery, and Dragon Air ceases to exist, now being Cathay Dragon. Others like Air Canada and Lufthansa are in their current new livery. The PBR work on the exterior really brings the plane to life. I feel without it, the exterior would really be lacking that real feel that the plane currently gives off. For the first time of the Aerosoft product to have PBR, it is a job well done for this new technology. Moving to the flight deck, the textures is a higher quality than what I came to experience with the A320 series. The flight deck, like the exterior, is very clean. However, it differs from the exterior, as I feel like all the textures are more crisp, even if they are the same pixel size as the exterior. Texts are easy to read even from a distance, and all the cockpit displays are nice and easy to read. Fairly crisp text, but a little less from the rest of the cockpit. It feels roomy, just like the real A330 feels. One drawback is the cockpit feels very dark, all the time. I believe this is due to the windows. Whether this is texturing or modeling, it makes me feel like I'm wearing sunglasses while in the cockpit. This makes night flying more difficult to see the taxiway lines, especially when the moon isn't out. Knowing that HDR could possibly cause this, I tested this and found no difference. I was able to clip my camera through the window and see that the windows have a pretty strong tint to it. The cockpit also has PBR textures, which was my first experience with PBR in the flight deck in P3D. It is a welcome addition for me. Seeing the lights reflect off the cockpit surfaces is great to see and adds to the immersion of the flight deck. Moving on to the systems, the A330 is very similar to the A320 in terms of how the systems work and how simplistic the systems are. If you are a user of the A320 series and are comfortable with it, you will have no problem jumping right into the A330 and taking a flight. However, the systems lack the depth to make this plane study level, as very little to no abnormal systems are modeled. This is a point A to point B aircraft, and while this isn't a problem, some people who would like to have a much deeper A330 simulation might be disappointed. From cold and dark, starting up the aircraft is as simple as turning on the batteries and applying a source of power to the aircraft. The engine's fire tests work, but that's about it in terms of emergency equipment testing. Aligning the ADIRSs, programming the MCDU, and overall other setup items are very similar, if not the same, to the A320 series. A lot of the aircraft is already configured or self-configuring, such as the electrical or hydraulics. The third MCDU is also used for adding fuel and payload, opening and closing doors, changing some preferences, turning the view system on and off, aircraft states, and more. The view system is not a good system, as some of the views straight up do not work or are broken, and those that do work are also zoomed in way too much to be useful. The polish of this aircraft is just not there in certain areas. Adding climb and descent winds was only available to do manually. The request button did nothing when I pressed it. The rest of the setup is near identical to the A320 Professional series from Aerosoft. Engine start is simple enough. Start the EPU, turn on the bleed air, switch engines to ignition start, and set the engine masters to on. The engines will automatically start right up. Trim move, make it move really quickly. 2 units of trim with a quick press of the button. Using the scroll wheel is much more precise, but is fairly slow. Takeoff feels like you are controlling this big heavy aircraft going down the runway, and liftoff does give a good sense of weight. After takeoff, not much is left to do for the pilot besides monitoring systems, changing the altimeter to standard at the right moment, and turning off a few lights. The aircraft follows SID restrictions fairly well, but can be fast at times, depending on how light the aircraft is. There are some included 2D panels, which cover all 3 MCDUs and the cockpit displays. I have come across an issue with one of the 2D panels that makes the plane reset almost. The fuel resets to the value I had before takeoff, the floodlights reset, and the packs also recycle. After that, the aircraft continues flying, but thanks to the extra fuel you have gained, makes landing possibly overweight. I have been able to recreate this on separate flights in different phases of flight. Fairly big bug that I would have hoped to have been caught before the release. Speaking of fuel, the fuel consumption could use some work for longer flights. Flying from Shanghai to Zurich, a flight the A330-300 Rolls-Royce engines regularly does, I would have run out of fuel long before reaching Zurich. My dispatcher showed me making it to Zurich with 9.4 tons of fuel still left on board, but the MCDU was showing negative 5.5 tons for my arrival, well short. The EFB is something that is becoming more and more common on add-on aircraft like this, and unfortunately this is an example of one of the not so good EFBs. The EFB offers checklists and flows, charts, an electric flight folder, documents, and links. The chart section has Navdata Pro chart cloud integration, but I do not have Navdata Pro, so I was unable to test this. One of the problems with the EFB, it is very hard to read unless it is in night mode, and even then it is still hard to read sometimes. It is very washed out and overexposed. However, turning off HDR does fix this issue. The links work sometimes, but often have resulted in me having a simulator crash. The SAT EFF link has also caused numerous crashes. Typing in the EFB was something that was near impossible to find and not something people would normally guess. It is activated by clicking on the top bezel of the EFB. I would like for there to also be a way to turn the EFB off to help with performance-heavy airports. Overall, not a good EFB. I personally do not use it when flying as it offers more problems than it helps with. The autopilot for the A330 is just like in the A320. It is fairly sturdy autopilot as well. The aircraft has not put itself out of limits for any time. Sometimes the aircraft will overturn going to a new waypoint on nav, but will smoothly correct itself. The auto throttle as well has some issues. When flying in turbulence, the speed tape can get very jumpy, and it is very easy for the safety functions to kick in and firewall the throttle. Also, when in turbulence on approach, it will maintain a speed faster than what you have set for the approach. The flight dynamics and ground handling of the A330 feels quite good. The aircraft feels weighty in the air in a very satisfying way. I found myself leaving the autopilot off for longer after takeoff to fly it by hand more. On the ground, the aircraft handles well as well. The engines provide a lot of thrust, even at idle, so taxiing without any power is possible with a lighter load. The fly-by-wire on this aircraft falls short in my opinion. While protections are working correctly, and normal flying is simple and easy, the aircraft is not the most responsive when it comes to control inputs. But this is only really an issue when landing. When I am on final and correcting a little bit with the roll, for example, there is a little bit of lag input, and then the control feels like there is still an input after I have released the roll with the stick. The pitch is similar to the roll as well. I have heard there is an experimental file where this is a more responsive and fixed, but I have yet to try that out. Having read about low FPS making the Aerosoft A320 fly odd, I decided to check this out as well with the A330. Limiting my FPS to 15, I was able to fly fairly well in clear and stormy conditions, but did end up getting about 25 knots faster while I was in the stormy weather conditions. Further limiting my FPS to 10, the aircraft was still able to stay level and under control as well, but I can tell it is struggling at this point. The elevators and sometimes the rudder can have a stuttering motion, and while not noticeable in the stormy conditions, in clear conditions, the aircraft was pitching up and down a bit as well with this elevator animation. Hand flying has more of a delay to it as well. Big lag spikes have caused the aircraft to really pitch sometimes, but I have personally not experienced a lag spike big enough to cause a crash. So while the aircraft is still flyable in these low FPS conditions, it is not recommended as the experience with low FPS makes it a lot less more fun. The terrain and weather radar work fairly well, but the terrain radar can look a bit blocky at shorter ranges. The weather radar on the A330 does make the weather appear oddly smooth and round compared to what I have seen with the other products. The weather and terrain radar on the ND, however, will not turn with the plane. While turning, it stays in the same position until the radar sweeps again. One of the more impressive elements with the weather radar is that it does work with all weather add-ons as well as default in-sim weather. Descent and approach is just like you would expect with an Airbus. However, the aircraft can get fast at times, so keeping an eye on the speed is a good idea. Descent is started by resetting the MCP altitude and pressing the altitude knob when you reach the top of descent. Star restrictions are followed fairly well, sometimes being fast however. The aircraft is able to capture and fly on ILS to auto-land smoothly and generally does not have any problems with ILS. The touchdown, rollout, and shutdown of the aircraft feels good with the physics. Systems are simple to shut down, getting APU power, shutting down the engine, turning off fuel pumps, and the rest of the shutdown procedures are easy to follow and execute. Also in the flight deck is a semi-copilot. This is something very similar to what is found on the PMDG DC-6, where a virtual copilot will run through checklists and configure the aircraft. For beginners, I think this is a cool tool to help them learn the aircraft,
Set on.
if it worked as intended.
Adheres.
The system is supposed to move the camera
Checked.
around the cockpit to show the specific area the checklist
Cabin
is looking
sign.
at, but it shows a completely
On
different
and
area
auto.
of the cockpit. The system
Air
also
condition.
moves a lot of the
Checked.
switches for you, but will pause at some points and wait
Fuel
for the
pumps.
user to complete the task without alerting them that it needs them to complete the task. Since the camera does not point at the right place for the user to complete the task, it is
Fuel
not a
pumps.
system I can recommend anyone to use, even newcomers to the A330. The sounds of the A330 are pretty good. The engine sounds are turbine sound simulations, which sound great. Interior-wise, the sounds are adequate for the experience with the plane. Switches and knobs have a satisfying click to them, and subtle sounds like the random page turns give the cockpit a nice feel. The extra sounds can be turned off as well in the third MCDU if desired. I have had some sound glitches where a warning sound will come on for a split second, and this seems to repeat regularly until engine startup. Taking a look at the performance, the A330 is actually one of the better performing planes I have used in my sim. Most of the time it is fairly smooth. Consistently while in cruise, I can get around 35 FPS on the inside and 60 FPS outside. Most airports I get around 30 on the inside and 40 on the outside. And while at night, the FPS drop is only about 5 FPS for my testing. Occasionally the aircraft will struggle with maintaining performance or have lag spikes, but this is not that often and only in heavy weather and heavy airports. I have on occasion experienced a crash, but these are not as common at all outside of the EFB. Being sold for €58.78, it is €8.41 less than the Aerosoft A320 family bundle, and this is a problem for me. For just over €8 more, you get 4 aircraft, each with their own engine option, and sharklet models. With this, you only get 1 aircraft and 1 engine option. I don't feel like the extra features in the A330 are enough to give it that high of a price tag. While a lot of the time and effort went into the A330, it doesn't seem like the price lines up very well with its other products, considering they are both very similar in quality, polishing, and features. Overall, I find the Aerosoft A330 an enjoyable aircraft. It is one of those aircraft I can come back to and does not get very boring. However, with that does come quite a few downfalls. The EFB is not very good, the documentation and extras are not polished or don't work, slow updates, and elements of the animations and textures work is underwhelming. But even with these drawbacks, I am still flying this aircraft and having fun time flying it. I can recommend this aircraft, but I would keep in mind everything I have mentioned previously. That's it for now, guys. Thanks for tuning into this review. Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell for our next video, and be sure to check out our other social medias and our website for more information on flight simming news and more. See ya!